Hello everyone and welcome to Civic Platform. This is your host Zuher Almusre. The Minister of Municipal Relations, Andrew Smith, announced that the Manitoba government is investing over $25 million through the Building Sustainable Communities (BSC) program to support 428 community development projects through the province. Today we are pleased to host the Minister Andrew Smith at U Multicultural Civic Platform to discuss this news. Honorable Minister, welcome to Civic Platform.
Well, thank you so much. Great to be here, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day as well to interview and share the good word that is coming here from the province of Manitoba. I know Zuher said here that the province is investing $25 million into community programs. That's true. The Building Sustainable Communities program, abbreviated BSC, so for those university students, like a Bachelor of Science, BSC, same thing. BSC, Building Sustainable Communities. And what we've done is we've actually created this program as a way to make sure that we had a consolidated grant program to fund community groups. So I'll give a couple examples here because I think it's important to talk about some of the groups who do get the funding. Basically, the groups that can get it are non-for-profit groups. But there's a wide range of not-for-profit groups, anywhere from community centers to some of the ethnocultural groups as well. So I just wanted to highlight some of the ethnocultural groups that got funding through our program this year. So we announced it just a couple of weeks ago, the funding for the $25 million, but here's some of the specific projects that did get funded. So I talk about Manitoba Islamic Association, $133,500. So that's a Pioneer Community Center upgrade. So we know the Muslim community here in Manitoba has grown substantially, right? Year over year, and we were at Eid together, so you know, and traditionally Eid's been celebrated downtown at the convention center. Now it's been spread about over a number of different community centers around the city, and at some point probably around the province as well. Right, so knowing how fast this community is growing, we want to make sure it's good to see investments going into the community like that. One other group here that I want to talk about is the Mawa Maui Wichi Itata Center. That's an Indigenous group. $300,000. The Ukrainian Catholic Archiparchy, which is camp renovations, $160,000. And I know Indigenous community, of course, as you mentioned a second ago, a very large community in our province, right? And a growing community. And of course, Ukrainian community. Large community, 1 in 7 Manitobans of Ukrainian descent. I know your assistant here, Yulia, was talking about from Ukraine. My grandparents are refugees from Ukraine, a lot of deep connection there. So Manitobans are very diverse and come from very different backgrounds. We want to make sure that's not only reflected in our, sure it's reflected in our funding. And so it's good to see some of these folks apply for it and get it. So the point of making is not only is it important to talk about who's getting the funding, but it's also important to remind folks out there who haven't applied, who have maybe in the past thought about, look, I'd like to expand my cultural center. Maybe I've got a gurdwara that would like it. Maybe I've got a mosque, a smaller mosque that's registered as nonprofit that would like some expansion. Well, they can come to this program and get some help. Now, the program doesn't fund 100% of the projects, it funds 50% or up to 50%. So of course, there'll have to be an application process, go through it. Now, the applications typically don't open until December, which is great because this gives you time now. We're at the end of May. If anyone's watching here, make sure that if you do have, and we'll provide you with the links and some of the information to it, if you are thinking about a project, please apply. Sure. We will make sure that if it's going to take some time to perhaps do some fundraising. It takes some time to plan your project. So this is a great lead time here from now till sometime in mid-December is when the project application's open. You can get yourself ready and make sure your organization is ready to apply. Because $25 million every single year. We also do a Arts, Culture, and Sport and Community Fund, which is $100 million. We did over 2 years. The last intake was done already and it's complete. I started that program when I was in the Sport, Culture, Heritage portfolio. And when I transferred over into this one, I got into municipal relations. I then was able to adjudicate and make sure that the Building Sustainable Communities Fund was then announced and money went out to community groups. So between the two funds, $125 million into our communities. You know, after COVID, it was tough, right? Small community groups, the biggest challenge I found from talking to people was, well, besides money, was finding volunteers. Right? We know volunteers have just been harder to come by than they have in the past. And I know there's a labor shortage, so when there's hard to get people to do work for pay, it's even harder to get people to work for volunteer. But this fund, we're hoping that can also allow groups to expand, and if you're expanding, you're growing your community base, your group, maybe that does inspire some folks to say, okay, look, this community group is growing, this community group is dynamic, and can encourage folks to come out and help, get involved, right? Sometimes walking through the door and or just taking one Saturday, one Sunday, whatever day it is that you don't work, to come and volunteer and start to get that momentum. And hoping that this could do the same thing for a lot of the community groups here in the province of Manitoba. And Winnipeg has received a lot of money, but rural Manitoba too. And for those of you from rural Manitoba know that there's a lot of immigration going on in some of our smaller communities outside Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, it hasn't been the case in Manitoba. It's been mostly Winnipeg, but we're starting to see a growth of immigration in rural communities. And this is even important too, because folks come to a community that may not have a mosque, may not have a gurdwara, or may not have the denomination of religion that is already there in that community. So these types of programs and grants, I think, do a tremendous amount of work to help fill gaps that otherwise would not be filled.
So this is a very good introduction. Like many of questions, what I have, you answered already.
Good.
So let's get deeper in this announcement. So what the benefit we will get in Manitoba and Winnipeg after we done this programs?
Well, the program is annual, so it opens every year in December and closes the following January. And what I think will happen is, well, when we first opened this program a number of years ago, it was $12.5 million. We doubled it to $25 million. Mm-hmm. We know, first of all, projects are more expensive, inflation, cost of goods, cost of construction has gone up. I'm sure everyone knows that. So we want to make sure that reflects increased costs. And we also know that, like I said earlier, there's needs in the community that perhaps were not necessarily addressed prior to COVID, maybe not recognized prior to COVID. So now we're in a new era past COVID. This is something that I think that can help address shortages in the community, gaps in the community. So we all know that community centers, cultural centers, often are the place where the community comes together to whether it's to play together, to celebrate together, or to pray together. And if those community centers aren't upkept, if they're not built in the first place, or they're not maintained, they're not expanded upon, they can start to deteriorate, and all of a sudden the community no longer has a meeting place. That's not good. So this is aimed at addressing some of those issues. Also, I want to add, and we know that accessibility, well, today I'm wearing a red shirt, it's Accessibility Day today here in Manitoba, and we want to make sure that this program does offer money for accessibility improvements. So wheelchair ramps and things like that, sometimes an elevator. If you go to an old building, elevators weren't always built in old buildings. But sometimes folks who are in a wheelchair, somebody who has some kind of physical disability can't get upstairs, a senior who's maybe at an advanced age where they can no longer walk up a flight of stairs, they can use an elevator. Building Sustainable Communities program will help fund those types of things.
What kind of criteria the organization should match to be eligible for these funds?
Well, there's a number of criteria. I think the first one is they got to be a non-for-profit. Right, so a private company can't come and necessarily apply for this. This is not for folks to make money off of. This is for community groups that do good in the community. One thing to keep in mind is it's normally matching funds, so we will give up to 50%. So if someone's asking for $100,000, they'd have to, or if the project's $200,000, an example, we could give $100,000. The community group would have to supply $100,000.
So you mentioned that this support, it's annually support, and this year it's increased for double. During the past years, what kind of challenges the ministry face to make the BSC succeed?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is always, anytime you create a grant program, is there's always more applicants than there are money to give out. So what I always say to folks, if you're going to apply, reach out to the office, find out if your specific project is eligible. Sometimes We can talk about a wheelchair ramp. We can talk about an elevator and a boudoir, an example. We can talk about expanding kitchen space in a community center. But to find out if the specifics of your project work out and are eligible, please reach out to the office, because then you know you've got a project that is potentially eligible. Application, fill it out properly. Sometimes that's where community groups might have issues, is filling it out. And this is why I'm here today, to hopefully introduce folks to the program, but also say that, you know, if you start in advance and you start now and start planning for it now and asking questions and getting feedback and assistance with it, the filling out the application becomes a lot easier to do. That's sometimes where folks find themselves where they can't get funded if the application wasn't filled out properly. We try and work very closely with these groups to make sure that that happens and that you can fill out your application, but sometimes that's not always the case. So knowledge about the program, and of course the ability to fill the application out and make sure that all the questions that are asked are answered properly, so that the person reviewing it can give you, can adjudicate it and say this group looks like it should be eligible for funding.
Apart from the announcement, it will be like to develop the children's play area.
Right.
How that important for our Winnipeggers, like to have a good environment for the children to grow here in Manitoba?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think as a father myself, I have a 4-year-old son, and we know exactly how it is with children. They always, you know, high energy, like to play, and whatever makes life easier for the kids makes life easier for mom and dad, right? I think we all know, as every parent out there knows that. So that's why a lot of these projects do fund. They can fund playground expansions. Sometimes they can provide money for splash pads. Right? Mm-hmm. Warm summer day, nothing better than a parent to take their child to a splash pad. Communities grow with young children in them, because if young families move into a community, young children grow up, the community grows up, and it typically is a good way to grow a neighborhood, right? If you don't have young families there, well, you don't have any growth. Mm-hmm. No children, no future, unfortunately. Where children go, parents go. Where parents go, they often want to live, and that's a great way to bring people into neighborhoods. So, and small rural communities, sometimes rural communities do struggle with retaining folks. You want to do everything we can to make sure young families want to raise their families here. And these amenities are that extra nice thing in the community to make sure that children can grow up in a great environment, and parents know that their children will be well adjusted and growing up in a great neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And, I might add, a great province.
Sounds great. This is like a final question. It will be just like a wrap up everything. Yeah. What's the ministry vision for the future, our 5 years in Winnipeg and Manitoba as well? What the improvement you are looking for, and how you want to see our city after like 5 years, if it's like a short-term goal?
Well, a number of things. So Municipal Relations does more than the Building Sustainable Communities grant. We fund municipalities right across Manitoba, including the city of Winnipeg. So just this year, we increased operation funds by $47 million, and capital, so infrastructure funds, by $23.5 million. That's very important, because municipalities, they have a limited tax base, we know that, and they have to build infrastructure. They have to pay for upgrades and maintenance. Those are very important things, and the cost of everything's gone up. So we want to work with the city and all municipalities to make sure that they can afford to serve their citizens. As you know, the city is probably the closest level of government, or your municipality is the closest level of government that you deal with, right? Garbage pickup, right? Pothole repair, all those types of things. And speaking of potholes, we gave $7.5 million this year to repair potholes in Winnipeg. They already have a budget for it. We just expanded it by $7.5 million, because we know how bad potholes are. Everyone knows that potholes happen in the city of Winnipeg, right across Manitoba. And during that season, we want to make sure that we gave the city a bit of extra help to make sure they could fill them.
Thank you very much for having us.
Of course.
We reached the end of this episode. We are very glad you share this information for our viewers. Thank you again, Minister.
Well, thank you very much. It was an honor.
You are very welcome. We reach the end of our episode. Thank you for watching. If you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe, and wait for a new episode from Civic Platform.